Hello everyone, welcome back to another Twitter clone full stack development tutorial. So in this video, we are going to get our API to talk to our database finally. So we need to do three things. We need to make sure Entity Framework Core is installed. We need to make sure that we then create a database context. We need to create an object to map our information from our database to, and then we need to return that object through the endpoint. All right. So those are the main things we need to get done. So let's go ahead and go to our project here, and we hit manage NuGet packages. All right. We have go ahead and type in entity framework core.sql server because we need to get both of these. I did Microsoft Entity Framework Core.SQL Server and downloaded this one, and it also downloaded Microsoft Entity Framework Core. You're going to need both of them. For some reason, if you just download Entity Framework Core, then sometimes you might not necessarily get SQL Server, excuse me, as well, which it happens sometimes. It happened to me last time, so I just downloaded this just to be safe. And so you should have both of these downloaded, both of which are by Microsoft. So once we have those downloaded, then let's go ahead and create a new folder because we need to create that context, right? So, but before I do that, actually, let's go ahead and create the folder and I'll explain a little bit more about Entity Framework. So we'll call this Data Services. All right. So we created the folder. Microsoft Entity Framework Core, though, is it's a package that allows us to map our database straight to C# objects. So we don't have to write actual SQL statements in order to query our database. It comes there for us, and we can also use LINQ as well, which if you haven't seen my tutorial on LINQ, go ahead and check it out as a refresher to kind of get up and running with that, because we will use that. However, this is a very powerful framework. It allows us to write clean code, and it allows us to write safe code as well, because if we didn't use Entity Framework Core and we just used raw SQL statements, then we're relying solely on those strings, which can be a little cumbersome and potentially error prone. So we're using Entity Framework Core, and we're going to see the magic of it here in a second. But right now we need to get everything set up. So let's go ahead and get this connection. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to add a new item, and this will be a class. And then let's go ahead and call this Twitter database context. All right. So let's go ahead and add that. Okay. So now we're here inside of this public class. Before we do anything inside of this public class, actually, we need to inherit from DB context. So nothing's going to show up yet because we haven't brought in Entity Framework Core. So let's go ahead and do that now. There it is. So now we are using Entity Framework, Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. All right. So now inside of this class here, we are going to create our connection string. So this connection string contains all of the information we need to connect to our SQL server and our database instance. So let's go ahead and create that right now. Private const string, oops, sorry, got a little crazy, string, and we'll call this connection string. Again, sorry, trouble typing here. Connection string, there we go, equals at, all right. So now we're specifying a path here, which is why we have this at sign, or this at symbol. So we need to I guess, provide values for a few parameters here. So the first parameter is going to be server. Now this server, since we have it hosted locally, all we have to do is press dot or period and then the backslash. I believe that's a backslash. And then we just specify the name of the server, which is SQL Express. All right. So this is the path to SQL Express. All right. Next, we are going to do database equals Twitter clone tutorial DB. All right. So now let's go ahead and just quick sanity check here. Twitter clone tutorial DB. We are getting that from this right here. This is the database that we're connecting to. So we've already got the server, right? SQL Express. Now we're getting the database, Twitter clone tutorial DB. All right. So now the last thing we need to do is specify that this is a trusted connection. All right. And that equals true. And we do that so that it knows that it can connect to the database, or the database server knows that this is a connection that can essentially be trusted. So let's go ahead now. And we need to create a function that will essentially connect to the SQL Server. So I'm going to go ahead and write that right now and explain what it does when I'm done. So it's going to be protected, override, override void on configuring, database context options builder, and this is, we'll just call it options builder. All right. Okay. Now in here, we're just going to use the base class, base on configuring options builder. All right. And then we're going to use options builder here to allow us to use the SQL Server. And then we need to connect to the server using a connection string. I told you I was going to explain it after I was done, but I couldn't help myself. So what we have here is we have our connection string specifying how to connect to the database. Then we have this override function for on configuring, so it allows us to kind of configure our database here. And the only thing we're really overriding here is we're overriding which SQL server to use, right? Because you see, base on configuring options builder, we're still calling the base implementation of this, and we're not really changing much except for this line, which is why we have to override it. It's because we're using this options builder, this database context options builder, right? And then we're calling this function use SQL Server, and then we're specifying this connection string, which is how we are going to connect to the server. Okay, whoops, got a little crazy there. All right, so we have our context made. So now let's go ahead and we're going to create a model. All right, so let's go ahead and hit add, new folder. We'll call this models. And inside of models, whoops, we are going to add a class. Whoops, my bad. Sorry, I cannot, for some reason, grab this. Here we go. So inside of models, new item, and then this class here, we will just call this Twitter user. All right, so we hit add, and then it just creates our base class here. So what we need to do is we are going to create an object that we can map um, our um, our data from our database to. So what we need to do is, before we do that, actually, we're going to create our properties. Public int user underscore ID get set. All right. Public string first name get set. All right. Oops. Actually, sorry. This is these are properties, so we need to specify specifically what we're doing here. Or excuse me, use the right conventions. So first name, then public string last name get set, public string email get set, and then last one, public string password get set. Okay, so what we need to do here is right above this user ID, though, we need to specify that this is the primary key, so it knows where to look for the primary key in this object. So we can just hit Alt-Enter, and then we're using component model dot data annotations. Okay, so now that we have our model object created, let's go now to login controller, and then we are going to tie this up here. So down here at the very end, let's just create a method. We'll call this, it'll be private async task. Now if async task does not look familiar to you, I definitely recommend going and checking out my tutorial on multi-threading and networking. So again, if this doesn't make any sense, definitely check out that tutorial. It'll make a lot more sense. So task list, and then this is going to be a list of Twitter users. All right, so what we're going to do here is, just to make sure that we get this down correctly, we are going to grab all of the users in our database just to test, just to make sure that we are getting everything, and just to reduce a little bit of the complexity. And so in the next video, what we'll end up doing is we will actually create, we'll tie in the login endpoint fully with the database. But for now, we just want to make sure that we're getting data back. And so we want to reduce some complexity. So we're just going to make this a GET request. And it's just going to grab all of the users in our database. Again, just for testing, just to make sure we're good. So let's go ahead now, and we're going to call this read users async. All right. So let's see. We need to add this, the Twitter user. There we go, using the models, and then we need to create. We need to do a little garbage collection here with the using statement, and then we're going to create a context. Var context equals new Twitter. Whoops. Context. All right. Using. Oops. Excuse me. Aha. So what we need to do is I forgot I named it Twitter database context. There we go. Sorry about that. Now we're using that, and it reads it. We're good to go. So it's squawking because we don't have a return statement, so we're going to get that in real soon. In fact, it's actually going to be very easy. All we need to do is right here, return, and then we're going to await context, and then in here we can say, oops. So one thing that we didn't do is we need to grab the object inside of the context, because right now the context doesn't have any, it doesn't have an object. So let's go back to it actually. So if you notice, we need actually an object and something to tell it specifically where to map to. So what we're going to do here is public db set, right? And then in here, this is going to be our Twitter user. Okay. There we go. And what this does is this allows it to map specifically to this model object. All right. And then we're going to use it. Twitter user. It tells us, it essentially says how we're going to get this data back from the database. So we want to get this data back from the database in this form, in this object. So Twitter user, and now this is the object we get back from the database. So we now go into login controller. We should see it now. Oops. So we go Twitter user, there we go. So Twitter user to list async, bam. Okay. All right. So one thing we didn't do here is we need to specify that this is an actual object. There we go. Okay, now all we need to do is we really just need to go back up to our GET request here, and we need to make the changes here. So instead of public string, it's going to be public async task list, and it's going to return Twitter user. All right. So now all we need to do here is return await read user async. There we go. So now we are calling the method that we created down there, and we are waiting for the response of that method. Okay, so we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and run it now, and we should see all of the users after we hit the login endpoint, because it's going to go here, and then it's going to hit our read user async method, and it's going to use this Twitter database context to grab our database object, and then whoops, and then right here this toList async is going to actually take all of the users and create a list out of them. So let's go back. Okay, we hit login, and now we hit enter and hope for the best. Let's see what we get. All right, so we got an error. It says keyword not supported, SQL Express database. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look and figure out what the issue here is. So server dot, I can already tell you right now, if that's what it is, then we are in trouble, because that's not going to fly. See, server dot, yep, sure enough, needs to be equals. So that is an issue, but we just took care of it, so it should be just fine now. So let's go ahead and run this again, and we're going to see if we get any errors. So it's hitting weather forecast, but we are actually just going to go in and hit login right there. All right, still loading, taking a second. Okay, so it says invalid column name, user ID. So if you notice, user ID spelled that way, but in our database, it's spelled user_ID. So let's go ahead and go back to Visual Studio. And we'll go back to Twitter user. Yeah, sorry, I was going to just gloss over that, but I wanted to show you why specifically we needed to do it this way is because it is mapping directly to this, and so it needs to have the same naming convention. So we're going to go ahead and change this. First underscore name, last underscore name, and then email and password. Okay. Now let's go ahead, run it one more time, and see what kind of errors we get next. All right, so we're waiting for weather forecast to load. All right, now we can go over here and hit login, wait for login to load. And there we go. So now we see all of our data. We only have one entry in there, but this is officially the data from our database. So we were able to connect our API to a database using Entity Framework Core. We were also able to diagnose a few issues along the way, a couple of common errors actually. I feel like this was very, very useful. These are common errors that I've gone through multiple different times, and so I really wanted to make sure that you guys were able to see these and figure out how to diagnose and how to change and how to fix these errors. Of course, the connection string, having it run into errors with spelling or having a typo is very common, so it's definitely make sure that we are vigilant in making sure the connection string's good, as well as making sure that our model maps correctly to our database. So, oops. Now if we run that again, we'll let that run and wait for that to get going. Now we go back to Postman, should be able to see it quite nicely. I have it here. I was testing it a little while ago. So let's wait for it. Oops. There we go. So now login, we have get. You can check and uncheck these to add parameters, which is cool. And we unchecked them, and now we have our data from our database. So long video, but I really wanted to make sure that we saw this from beginning to end and saw all of the many common issues that you're likely to run into. I wanted to show you guys how to do it, all 3 steps specifically. So I'm going to try and break these videos up and make sure that they're shorter, but sometimes they're going to be a little long, and that's just how it is. But I really want to make sure that we understand how to do this from start to finish. So in the next video, we'll dive a little bit more in depth with the API. And from here, we're just going to go on to publishing what we have so that we can actually see it in a browser on different devices, so it's no longer local, and how we're going to get set up with Azure Portal. So stay with me. It's going to get really fun. Then this is going to be really cool because then you'll be able to hop onto any device and show people this data, even though they're not really going to understand it. And then we're going to start seeing how to make the front end with it. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you guys are having as much fun as I am, and I'll see you in the next one.